Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and welcome to Best of Designers. Today we're talking about a designer who's mostly known for making the most popular game in the Euro gaming world, and that is the Settlers of Catan, or Catan. Back in '94, this game's selling millions of copies and making its own franchise of games out there. But today we're talking about his top 10 games. While he might be best known for Catan, he has made several other games, even if many of them are in the same universe and or line as Catan, but there's still some really great games. We'll start with number 10, Entdecker. Entdecker is kind of an exploration game. You're going to be moving out and you're flipping tiles over and kind of building a map as you go and finding things. Maybe some people like this a lot more than I do. I think it's a pretty decent game, finding these and going out and exploring, and they made a second edition which was, I think, superior to the first one. Then number 9 is Wacky Wacky West, one of the weirdest games you'll ever play, as you're putting tiles down and building this town and trying to cover up or not cover up bathrooms that are on the board. You need these outhouses to be able to go to these things, and you get points based on how you put these things out. It's a wacky wacky theme. That's Wacky Wacky West. Number 8 is Ellison, the First City. This is the first city of Catan. This is set in a Catan universe, although it's not really a game like that. You're trying to get areas of the city and then build buildings into these areas for points. So it's very, very different. The only thing that's the same is the theme, but it has some unique, interesting ideas, although I haven't heard anyone really talk about the game. Number 7 is Barbarossa. Now, Barbarossa is really kind of off the path for Teuber. It's a game in which you are modeling things with clay, and then people are guessing what you've made out of clay. You know, it's a typical party game. But in this game, you get the fewest points if people guess your thing first, and you get the fewest points if people guess your thing last. So you want it to look kind of like what you're making, but not too obvious that people will guess it immediately, which for many of us is a great thing. So it's a fun game, Barbarossa. Number 6 is Candemere, the First Settlers. Another game in the Settlers of Catan universe, but this one is closest to being a role-playing board game where you have a settler and they're going to increase in stats. But these aren't stats for fighting and things. These are stats for like going out, cutting down trees and hunting bears and things like that, which works. It works in this situation. It's a little longer, I think, than it needs to be, but it is a lot of fun and it has a unique feel to it. Candemere, the First Settlers. Number 5 is Northwind. Now, I put Northwind on here, although this game is based on Starship Catan, so you can stick that one in here too. Starship Catan was the 2-player version of Starfarers of Catan, which was the space version of Catan. But it was a completely different game, and Northwind does the same thing, except it's a 4-player game and it has pirates. As you have your ship, and you're going to be building up different aspects of that ship, and then eventually going out to explore through decks of cards, trying to remember what's in each deck as you trade back and forth and fight other people. Not fight other people, but fight these things that you find. A really cool game. Number 4 is Catan itself. Settlers of Catan. How can we argue the greatness of this game, which has sold millions and millions of copies, as you simply roll some dice, look at your towns and settlements on the board, and get resources, and then trade them with other players. It has had a gazillion expansions to it. Some of them are fantastic, like the Fishermen of Catan, Seafarers of Catan, and there's different variations of this game, but when it comes down to it, it just, as a base game, is just incredibly fun, and when you introduce it to people, they're like, wow, I've never seen something like this before, but it's also so popular now that it's almost a household name where most people you run into will know what Catan is. Number 3 is the card game version of this, which was originally called the Settlers of Catan card game. Now it's called Rivals of Catan. And I was a little suspicious of this when I first, is this going to be like Catan for 2 players? How's that going to work? It works really well, to the point where it's a completely different game. There's trading, you're putting cards out, rotating cards, building your thing. There's a lot of cool expansions for this game too. That this is one of those games that does really well with expansions. You're like plugging in different expansions, but just as back and forth as you play the cards and try to outdo your opponent, really like the Rivals for Catan. Number 2 is the space game version of Catan I mentioned earlier, Starfarers of Catan. This one is the closest to Catan of all these games. It's very similar, except that you're sending out spaceships and discovering new outposts out there. There's a lot of versions of Catan. There's Game of Thrones Catan, Star Trek Catan. But Starfarers not only has some of the coolest components of any game ever, it also has a lot of neat exploration ideas in it. I just really like the game a lot. Starfarers of Catan. And my number one game from Klaus Teuber has nothing to do with Catan at all, and that is Domain. Although some people will argue with me and say Lowenherz, which is the game Domain is based on, is better. They're both good, but Domain is the better version. In Domain, you are controlling different areas on a board and your own little kingdoms and putting little fences around these kingdoms. And then once your kingdom's finished, kind of growing it, encroaching it on your opponent's kingdom with very simple card play. Pay money to play a card, or give up a card to take money. But if you do that, someone else can pick up that card and use it for themselves. Cards might have multiple things that they can do, mostly putting fences down and expanding, but also try to make your kingdom more powerful so people can't encroach on it. It is a really solid game. One of my favorite 4-player games, one of my favorite games, period, and my favorite game that Klaus Teuber has designed. We got to give him a lot of credit. Sometimes when people do one game like Catan, people are like, yeah, you're a one-trick pony. He is not a one-trick pony. He has done wonderful, fantastic things. Tell me what your favorite games of his are in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Tom Vasel, and you've been watching Best of Klaus Teuber.